Work isn't just the job you get paid to do. Work is taking an idea that exists only in your mind and making it real. Every invention, every business, every song, every conversation, and yes, even every podcast starts as nothing more than an idea that someone was willing to build. Today's guest knows that better than most. As a fellow podcast host, he understands that podcasting isn't simply about microphones, downloads, or social media clips. It's about creating a space where distractions disappear, curiosity takes over, and people feel comfortable enough to tell the stories that matter. In this conversation, two podcast hosts sit down to talk about the work of podcasting. Let's roll right in. All right, welcome to the Work Sucks, but I Like It podcast. Today we have Wisdom Okonkwo. He's the host of the podcast, My Podcast Story. And the reason why we have him on today is I was on his show and I wanted to flip the switch and talk about the work behind a podcast. Wisdom, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Tony.
No, good to see you, man. Wisdom, define work for us today. Define work.
Given the definition of a work will be embellished with my own point of view, and I say work is what it takes to realize an idea into a reality. I tend to define that because most of the work I do is taking an episode idea, a podcast idea, into something that people can listen and partake of versus just, oh, this is a lovely idea to something that, okay, yeah, this is amazing.
That's a beautiful definition of work. So, I guess, how do you take these? I guess, first off, why did you come up with my podcast story? Very curious how you came up with the name, that
Yeah,
idea that you made reality now.
I love the idea. I think when I saw Starter Story, so it's a different brand entirely, and I was like, oh yeah, did this Starter Story? And then I saw My First Million, and I was like, wait, what if we do my podcast story, and then podcast host and the movers and shakers of podcast industry come around and share their story. And so that was the idea behind my podcast story. And the moment I came up with the name, and like it just clicked, and I was like, this is it.
So, where do you see, I guess, the trajectory of your podcast? I'm just curious, as like another podcaster, we're creating these conversations. I guess, what are you working towards? What's this idea now? You have this idea. What is more of the reality or the idea that you're trying to explore now?
I think the whole idea behind my podcast story is if you look at podcasting, and it's common in most industries, there are people who they talk about, oh, this is what you should do with your podcast, which of course, great idea, but nobody really gets to talk to the people that are in the trenches, creating a podcast, building a podcast, those on the mic and behind the mic that people don't even get to hear their voice, but they create most of the amazing shows that were part of our childhood. I mean, if you're a Gen Z and young for podcasting, and there are those who are like, oh yeah, the favorite shows. And so my podcast story, the whole idea is to give a platform to these people to share their story because they're always the ones asking the questions, but to get them to be asked the questions and get them to share their story, that's like the whole idea for the platform. And for the trajectory, I think I want to get to a point where I can look at the top 100 podcasters in the US, top 100 podcasters in Canada. Right now, I'm thinking of Anglophone speaking podcasters because I only speak English. Maybe in the future, we might move into countries that speak other languages. But I want to look at the list and say, okay, yeah, I think I've interviewed 75% of those people. I know them. We've talked. That's the goal. Not really numbers or views. I mean, that's lovely, but that's not really a thing.
So I guess why the medium of podcasting with them? Like, why do you resonate with a podcast?
Okay, first of all, having a podcast called My Podcast Story and not having it on podcast, that will kind of be
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Sorry, I guess yeah, good point. Duh.
that would be
I guess
that would be ironic. But I get the question.
all
Just
right,
to step back, the podcasting
gotcha.
medium.
Sorry, yeah, right.
I kind of loved the idea of the radio, the audio media form being in your head. And with if you've noticed with the reels, vertical videos, there's always this distraction versus if you're listening to a podcast, you're probably going for a run or you're in the kitchen doing some things and it's just there. It's not like there's another content that's like, oh, look at me, click me, watch me, listen to me, and that's itself, I just felt it's different. I love that medium, and I'm like, yeah, I love the medium. I'm going to create with this medium too.
What are your thoughts then of the video too? I guess because I just asked because you see it as a growing trend, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah. What are your thoughts with video entering the podcast scene?
Okay. The first thing I see is that, I mean, it's using creating video makes it easier to create multiple pieces of content. That is, if you're making video, it's easy to repurpose into clips and other forms of content. The other thing I see with video is, in a sense, it creates kind of receipts, because now we're having these conversations, and versus we just did audio only, which of course is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But now I can see, oh yeah, Tony, they both had a conversation versus you're like, oh yeah, are we really sure the conversation happened? Not really.
Okay, so no, I like that you kind of called it a receipt, kind of like visual evidence. I guess I'll be honest with you on my podcast, I don't have the resources yet this summer. Maybe you'll be the first one. We'll make video here, because it's so
When you
accessible now.
say you don't have the resources, can you help me understand what you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess like no, great question. No, podcast host talking to podcast host. No, I love this. So, I mean, I'll be honest with you, this is kind of like I hate to call it, side hustle, but I just genuinely enjoy podcasting too, like you do. And but I'm doing my PhD part time. I have a 9 to 5 job. I want to balance my relationship with my girlfriend, spend time with friends. I teach yoga, I'm finishing a book as well. I've
Oh,
started another book. So
congrats.
no, thank you. So, yeah, I just say resources, and it's not like it's not I definitely want it. I definitely want video because I agree with you. It's like, okay, that's great, the audio, but it's almost like, I wanna go to video this summer in that people don't know how to, like, interact anymore. And I guess, like, with a podcast, with video, it's showing us interacting, right? It's
Yeah.
showing that we're engaged with each other. You're not on your phone, I'm not on my phone, I'm talking to you, right? It's like reminding us how to like have a
Yeah.
conversation with another human being. So that's what I mean by kind of resources. But no,
You
that's a
do
great
have the
question.
setup though. Your audio sounds great. The background for those that are listening, it's the library, which is beautiful by the way.
Thank you.
And your
Yeah.
camera, it's it makes mine look like a 1950s camera. It's
Oh, that's
lovely.
well, thank
So
you.
you do have what it takes, and nothing changes in your workflow. I mean, if you record the video with Riverside, the same way you edit the audio, you edit it and you send it to YouTube and Spotify, and like that. So nothing really changes.
No, you're
And
100% right. I guess I'm going to get technical here. Listeners, bear with us as we dive into this because I think this is
yeah,
great here in the technical details of podcasting. So, Wisdom, you use Riverside. Of course, I use
yeah,
Riverside to host our show here. I guess, no, excuse me, to record the show.
yeah.
What do you use to host the show?
Oh yeah, what I use to host, I use Spotify for creators, so it's free. So
Okay,
that's why I use that, just because it's free.
no
There are
kidding.
other
Okay,
great tools there, but I just chose that because I love free things that work.
yeah, why not? Right, if the resource is there. Okay, interesting. So
Yeah.
I use Buzzsprout. There's a
Okay.
paid subscription. Um, Interesting, cool. Because I guess with Buzzsprout, I haven't you can do video now, but I
Yeah.
haven't upgraded my package, but that's good to hear that Spotify has, that option for video.
Yeah. At the point in time, I was like, oh, what if, if it's because it's free, there are a lot of considerations. What if this? What if that? And then I realized that podcasting is easy to move. If I switch and move to a better host tomorrow for any reason, I can easily redirect and just move without having to say, oh, all those years of episodes, what is going to happen to them? Am I going to lose it? And nothing's going to change. The listeners, they're not even going to know anything. They just click on the
Right.
episodes and still listen. And so with that in mind, I'm like, I'm not locked in, like, being on a platform like YouTube where I'm like, oh, I want to go to this other platform. What happens to my videos? And you can't really do anything.
No, that's a great point. I guess, Wisdom, what do you this is the Work Sucks, but I Like It podcast. What sucks about podcasting today, and what are you doing to make it not suck?
What sucks about podcasting is the post production, the editing,
Ah,
the doing of the titles, the description. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much if you're doing just one episode a week, but if you have like 5 podcasts like I do and, multiple episodes and all that, then it becomes a lot. I love the conversation. I love to talk to people. I love to do research to find amazing people to talk to. But that other part, I really don't see anything creative about it. And what I do with it is I use AI. So I create a custom prompts. I use Cast Magic, and you could use ChatGPT for this. And I just paste the transcript. It comes with all the things, and I copy and paste. And I've not really found a way to just do the thing without copying and paste. That would be lovely.
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's fun to lead up to the interview and to have the conversation, and afterwards you're like, "Man, this sucks," like, going back and editing the ums and the ahs and the long pauses where people are collecting their thoughts or whatever. I guess, wisdom, share for the listeners, because sometimes I feel like this is sort of overlooked with a podcast. Let's say for every half hour of recording that you do, what time would you spend on top of that half hour to be able to publish the show? And what's
I do
involved? Talk us through,
if
like, all the things involved.
I do a half hour an episode, at least I'll spend about 30 minutes in guest communication. That's if it's a guest interview. So are we talking about the guest interview episodes or solo episodes? So
I
I'm not
love it. You
thinking
run with it. Start with whichever one. I love it. I love it.
okay. For solo episodes is easier because now I don't have to communicate with guests. No, it's just me. I show up, I record my thing. I don't even have to do up to 30 minutes. I can do 20 minutes and I'm like, oh yeah, that's enough for the idea. And I can easily edit. And so for the editing, it would take me about 40 minutes, about an hour for a 30 minutes episode to edit and then schedule and publish. So for a solo episode, it take me about 3 hours to do a 30 minutes episode. And then for guest interview, it take about 30 minutes, to message the guest. Let's just say 1 hour of back and forth messaging, getting them to book across maybe a week or so. And then 30 minutes of recording time. And then you edit the episodes. So a 30 minutes episode would take about minimum of 1 hour to edit. And so it takes about 3 to 4 hours for just an episode across maybe 1 or 2 weeks, depending on how long it takes to get to one episode.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, right? I think that's like, it's similar for me, right? For every half hour, it's at least 1 to 3 hours, depending on what
Yeah,
happens, right? I had an incident the other day and they didn't have a microphone. And I was like, oh, Riverside will like clean it up with AI, no problem, right? I'm in the post, right? Doing the
uh,
edit and it didn't clean it up. And I felt so bad, wisdom. I had to go back to this person and say, I am so sorry, but this sounded like crap. I didn't say it like that, and we have to redo it. And it totally sucked because they didn't have a good microphone. And then come to find they
yeah,
had one, but it wasn't like turned on. So I've learned to ask the question now, okay, sometimes I can see the microphone. I know you're a host, so you've got a microphone set up. So it's like
yeah,
now I just ask people, okay, you get the microphone, we got the headphones, like we're yes. But that quality
yeah.
input.
Yeah, I've had my own fair share of battling with noise, and I found Riverside is great when if it's just regular, background noise. But when it's like the deep of the deep, I use things like phonic, that would like remove and fix the sound. And most of the time, I feel like the more work you do in pre-production, the less work you have to do in post-production. So the more time you spend, maybe an extra 15 minutes, say, okay, is your mic connected? Have you turned off the fan? Is the AC turned? It's on, those background noise, and the room is quiet. And I mean, you get a fairly decent sound, so you don't have to like do so much work after production. But if you're like, oh, I'm just going to do everything, and
Have you ever had to tell anyone, like, "We had to stop this interview"? Have you ever had to, like, stop an interview because it sounded so bad?
for the sound, stop the interview. For most of the people I interview, they are what I like to call career guests. So they're people
Ah.
who, maybe once in a month they go to 1 or 2 podcasts. So they've been in the business of appearing on podcasts. So they kind of set up in a sense. But where I think the issue would come up would be when you're reaching out to people who they've never been on a podcast in their entire life. And so they really have no clue about it. And they're like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? I mean, for most people, even though they've never been on podcast, in a sense, they've used Zoom. So they kind of
Mm.
they kind of
Okay.
like it. But I find out that if they do have a quiet room, the place is quiet, and with the devices, you should get a good sound. The other scenario is where they're recording the interview in a very noisy place. Or maybe they have the place where they are, it's not noisy, but probably their house is close to a train station. I've had that instance, but
Okay.
the thing I had was that the train just passed once, in the interview, and then we're good to go. But in scenarios like that, I mean, it happens once in a while, but I don't really think there's anything we could do. I try to make the guests look good as much as I can.
No, I love that. I love that. It made me think of I was doing an interview with someone and their 2-year-old was running around and he kept interrupting and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm like, "This is
Yeah,
part of the work. You're a parent. Like, this is great." I kept it in the episode. I kept the noise.
yeah,
It was I thought it was fantastic. Wisdom, what
yeah.
is one thing you fear most as a podcast host when you're podcasting?
This is strange now because I've done so much interviews that I feel like I've seen everything.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, all right. Fair enough.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
no.
I love it.
I've
Yeah,
done
you're
I've
seasoned.
I've done over 1,000 interviews, and I've interviewed different guests, and so I feel like I've seen one form of the other. So nothing surprises or scares me anymore. I mean, might have scared me in the past, but now I see somebody with a child, trying to say, oh, maybe a pet. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm like, yeah, oh, awesome. It's not out of the ordinary. The other thing that scares me the most is doing my research for a guest
Mm.
and showing up on the podcast, and the guest realizing that the guest is like, oh no, I don't want to talk about that stuff.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
and then the
Okay.
guest is like telling me that this is what I talk about. Like, I don't think that would really happen because if I do my research good enough, that won't happen. You understand? It's like if I have okay, I have one of my podcasts is called Class of Business, and I tend to interview people who are in business. And then I should be able to find out, but because I've had an instance, I think 2 instances where I reached out to someone, a doctor, and I was like, I just want you to talk about the stories and the lessons you've learned of life. And then the guest just showed up. You know, he filled in the questionnaire, he filled in the quote and everything for my podcast. But when he showed up, I was asking him, "What's the quote you want to share with me?" And the quote he did share was completely different from the topic of the podcast, and he
Oh,
was talking
no.
about it was talking about it was just completely different. And I was like, no, we can't do this interview. I mean, there's no way I can force this episode to align. Like, no, no, we
So how
can't do
did
it.
you I'm curious, did you call it right then when you realized?
Yeah,
Or
I
how
didn't waste.
man.
I felt like it was completely disrespectful to waste his time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no. Well, the
'cause
fact that they
just
didn't
just for more
yeah.
context, one of my podcasts is called Relatable Wisdom, where I ask people to share their motto, philosophy, quotes, and he put the quotes. He filled in the quotes he wanted to share and all that, and I prepared with the quotes and all that, and then he came on the podcast and he said, marijuana is medicine. And I'm like, okay, it's not like I have anything against marijuana or any of those things, but I have a self-improvement podcast. It's about stories, life and stuff like that, quotes and lessons. And I don't really see how that fits into it. And I was like, no, this is not going to work. And it wasn't a question of the guest. It was just like, oh, this is what the guest wants to talk about. So the guest wants to talk about what he talks about instead of his story, right? And that didn't work. So I think just a lessons to people who want to guest on other people's podcast, understanding the angle of the podcast matters a lot. Not just, oh, this is the message I want to share, and just trying to like force it down the throats of the
I
listeners of
like
the
that
show.
a lot, right? Because I would get people on my podcast, not that you're, like, trying to sell your podcast, you're speaking very genuinely, which I love, but you're right,
Yeah.
though, they come on and they're like, "I wanna sell my five-step program," and you're just like, "No,
Yeah,
no, no,
and
we
you're
wanna
like,
talk about work," and that's
and
fine
you're
at the end, right? You can share your five-step program and your coaching,
yeah,
but let's talk about the work, but it is tough, right? As a host, you're trying to navigate the conversation to save face, you wanna call them out, like, "Stop talking about yourself, talk about what the
yeah,
podcast is talking about." No, I love that. So,
yeah.
wisdom, one thing that's happened to me, and I know you've done hundreds, thousands, you said, of episodes. What happens when no one shows up? I feel like I've been getting that in the past couple months. Like, people will
Mm,
book a podcast and then I'm waiting there. It's like a date, you know, you're like 5, 10 minutes late and then you're just like, is this happening? What are your thoughts around that? I guess when people don't show up after
At the
they've set the
be
time.
at the beginning when I started podcasting, at first out, it was easy to blame. I was like, "What this guest? They're terrible. These people evil. These people wicked. They're disrespectful."
Right, right.
But then I was like, "Wait, it's my fault." Not in a way to like condemn myself, but like what could I actually do? And then I realized that there are two reasons why people don't show up for a meeting. Number one, an emergency showed up. Number two, they forgot that they booked the meeting. Especially if your calendar has enough space where they can book like 1 month in advance. And they book the meeting and it's gone. So I was like, okay, start collecting emails and phone numbers and reminding people, 3 days to the meeting, 1 day to the meeting, 3 hours to the meeting, 15 minutes to the meeting. I give them a text them and say, hi, am I seeing you in the podcast? And then I noticed that the show up rate increased. And what would happen is that if people are not going to show up, when they see the reminder, they would respond that, oh, I'm not going to make it to the meeting, maybe a day or maybe 10 hours or 3 hours to the meeting. And that way I won't just show up and be waiting.
Do you give people, like, strikes, I guess, you know? Because 'Cause I've had an instance where I've had it to 2 or 3 times where I've literally gotten ghosted. I wanna say it was 3, I'm gonna be honest with it, and I was thinking like you, I'm like, "Hey, is there an
Why
emergency? Is
did I
everything
why
okay?"
did you ask them why?
I should have. They said there was an alarm. They said they kept missing their alarm. Obviously, I'm not gonna use the name here, but it just kept missing the alarm, and I don't know, maybe it was in a different time zone around the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah,
but
that
I was
happens.
like you, I'm like, "Okay, I don't send notifications out, I like that, I should start doing that,
Yeah.
thank you."
If they
But
happen the first time, before they book, make sure you could take their phone number so that maybe
to
30 minutes to the
text,
time you
yeah,
could text them or call
I
them,
like that,
because right now we're just sitting down and they don't even know that the meeting is happening.
yeah. That's a pro
Mm,
tip, thank you, Wisdom.
yeah.
I love
You're
that.
welcome.
So I want to go back to your kind of like, thoughts of taking the idea into reality. So I feel like people have a lot of ideas, right? Walk
Yeah.
us through that process. I know it's kind of a very open-ended question here of turning that into a reality. Like I guess the times that suck, the times like you've done thousands of episodes, hosted numerous podcasts. Like how do you get through all that noise to see your idea become that reality?
I think there are two instances. The first instance is you wake up one day and you have a perfect vision of what the reality you're trying to build is. The second instance is there's a problem you're trying to solve, but you don't know what a perfect solution looks like. Okay. So for the I think in both instances it's the same. You create the first viable products. You just create something, and then you keep innovating and iterating until you get something better. In this instance, which is podcasting, it's quite different because with a podcast you have to release your episodes. It's not like a book where you write the first draft and you have to do multiple iterations before you release. But with a podcast, you do the first three episodes and you're like, okay, how did the conversation go? And then you apply it to the next episodes, not not the backlogs. And so the first 5, 10 episodes, they're gonna be terrible. And that's just it. I mean, if it's not terrible, it means you didn't grow. Yeah, there's no way even if your standard is so high, right? It's just that your terrible might be less terrible than our terrible. But the fact that you grew in the past 6 months, you're like, oh wow, I can't believe I started my intro like this. I mean, you know, that guy was really terrible.
No, that's great. So one of the things we like to say on the show wisdom that is this success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skills. What would you say is the skill to keep that sort of like what you were talking about, right? With the idea of
Yeah.
improving. What's that skill that you're kind of talking about?
Yeah. I think one thing I want to be intentional about doing is that we're not intentional about feedback. Okay.
Ah.
And for me, it's something I want to work on. So what I mean is that usually to grow, we record a podcast episode, we maybe listen to it and say, oh, it's good, it's wonderful. And then we move on to the next episode. So there is no feedback. So we're just doing, hoping that when we keep doing, we will improve. I mean, we we will improve, but in order to improve better, we have to like get feedback. And how do we do that? In my own case, as a host, I want to start sending surveys to guests, you know, surveys that will force them to actually give me feedback and not just say, "Oh, great episode," because some guests they don't want to
Right.
hurt your feelings and like so just send them and say, "Okay, on a scale of 3, what do you think about this episode? Could the episode be shorter or longer? And really get them to questions that that force them to give feedback without it being like they're insulting because most guests are just kind, and that's for the host and the guest. And then if I'm doing guest appearance like this, I would love to. I have not set up a system like that, but I would love to send you a message after the conversation and say, okay, what was the conversation like, and then you give me feedback. And what did you think of the speaking? Did I talk too long? And things like that. And then I'll look at it and say, okay, yeah, Tony has given me feedback, but I'm going to look at the next 5 episodes and see the pattern because 5 people cannot just lie and say, "Oh, you talk too much."
Yeah, no, and
Or
I'll
you
do
talk
the
too fast.
same, I'd love to hear your feedback on me, but it was interesting. So I was listening to another podcast and it's on like
Yeah,
yoga cults or something, and they came out and blatantly were talking about like we don't need more feedback. And I guess, like, I was trying to think about why they were saying that, right? Because I agree with you. You need some sort of feedback to improve, right? You see it all the
yeah,
time in sports, right? If you lose a game, well, that's feedback that you clearly didn't do well to win the game. So it's
yeah.
like it was interesting to hear on this podcast that they didn't want any feedback, that they were just like, we're just going to be ourselves and blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts in terms of like authenticity behind what you do? Like, what does it mean to show up and be wisdom?
Okay. For most of us, we've not expressed ourselves. Like we've not. Podcasting is the first time we're trying to express ourselves. So what that means is that in a sense, we're a babe in expressing ourselves to the public. And so, like a child who's just learning to speak. What do you tell the child? You tell the child, "Oh, you be your authentic self." When they talk, don't correct them and say, "Oh, you have to say it like this or like this or say it this way and this way." Of course, we give them feedback. They learn. They listen to the way we talk and they improve, and then they get better. And so, what I like to see podcasting as, I'm like, okay, I'm a babe in this industry. I'm a babe in expressing myself, and in order to because I could keep doing the same thing again and again in terms of speaking, in interviewing the host, the guests, talking to them, and do it for a couple of rows and still not improve. And so, what I'm looking at, okay, how am I talking? And am I talking? So looking at those criteria, I think the problem is we think that when we're talking about our authentic self, and we think it's an authentic self that we don't want to improve. I mean, being authentic is not okay. How do I say this now? I'm talking. I'm not trying to be what I'm not, right? But I know that I can improve how I speak. I know I can improve how I relate with people, right? And with that, I'm like, okay, how do I know what to improve? Not necessarily try to be someone else. How can I refine, sharpen my spear, my skills, not, try to be someone else. And when you look at feedback from that perspective, then you're like, okay, yeah, how do I be my more authentic self?
No, I really love that, right? Because it says, and you kind of said it really, you said it very well, actually. I can't wait to listen to that on the recording here. But it's like there's a difference between you being authentic and then a difference between you like upping your skills, right? And I think sometimes with feedback, it feels very personal, right? Like you said, kind of an insult to your who you are, but it's not. You are who you are, right? You're not anything else, right? You are who you are. So I
Yeah.
really love that idea of like enhancing the skill, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you speak a certain way, I speak a certain way. However, I want to become a better speaker, right? So if I'm getting feedback, I'm not saying, oh, did I draw my sentence the way Tony would draw its sentence? No, I'm like, how do I become a better speaker, right? And I'm not trying to be Tony, and Tony's not trying to be wisdom. Tony's asking, based on the way I speak, based on the way, the language I speak, how do I capture people's attention? How do I share my story? You know, this is what we're trying to do, not necessarily trying to be what we're not. And I think that's where people get it wrong. They're like, okay, um, I don't need feedback. And I'm like, no, feedback feedback is not critique. And if you have a way to set up the questions so you can get true feedback, that would be really, really, really nice.
I love that. Can you give us an example? Maybe what is something, so say someone has given you feedback over the years you've been doing this. What have you
Okay.
liked about feedback that's resonated? And then what did you not like with feedback? That's the easier one. Start with yeah, what did you like about certain type of feedback that you were given?
I think the first thing is that uh, when people who are not permitted to give feedback. So what I mean is,
Ah.
it's like you criticize in the movie when you've not watched the movie. I don't think you should. If I catch you, right? So in order for you to give me feedback, either I have interviewed you or you've listened to my podcast. Okay, that's one. That goes without saying. And then the other thing is giving specific feedback. Okay. Right. So instead of saying, your episode is terrible, that's not feedback. That is not feedback. You're like, okay, I feel like, your intro was a bit too long. It was about 9 seconds and you were just talking and talking and talking. I mean, if you could get into the meat of the content, that would be nice. It's like, okay, okay, okay. Now I understand what you're talking about. Okay. And versus, oh, the episode is terrible. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with that? you know, uh, feedback for me, I feel like it's an objective lens to see. It's like when you do correction. I don't know if did it in your school. When we were young, we'll do spellings assignment, mathematics assignments, and then we'll do the correction on the board and we'll exchange our sheets and mark. And then when the teacher would do the correction based on the fact that the teacher taught us already, it has to make sense. If it doesn't make sense, we'll question it.
Yeah,
And then we're like,
right.
and so I feel like because once the feedback comes in, you're like, oh wow, that's true. How come I missed it? Right? So that's in a sense how good feedback looks like, right? It's not telling you that, oh, you did well in this stuff. It's awesome. It's like, oh, I mean, if you did plus one, you did not carry this play. You forgot to add this two after doing the calculation. Oh, wow. And you're like, yeah, I missed it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was nice. And then you move on. Because in a sense, we have a picture of where we're going to. And so when the feedback comes in, it makes sense compared to that pattern, except of course the pattern is just completely different. And then instances where um, if you're like trying to have an episode where you're not really saying, you're just trying to have a terrible conversation and you're not looking to like grab people's attention, you just want to talk to people. That's the picture where you're going to. So if I give you feedback and say, um, you want to hook people, you want to get them to start, and like your goal is just to talk to people, and in talking to people you don't really hook people when you're talking to someone in real life, so it's not really to get listeners. And so you might not make sense of the feedback because it doesn't fit into the big picture you're trying to go to, which doesn't mean that you're proud or anything, but we all as hosts, we all have our big picture. And so certain feedback doesn't, it's like you're trying to build a software product and people are like, oh, put this feature, put this feature, put this feature. And you're like, no, no, this is this software we're building, not this one.
I guess, wisdom, what about the medium of the feedback, right? You talked about the teacher, right? You got I can picture it now, right? Young wisdom is doing the math problem and the teacher's
Yeah.
kind of saying, do this and that or whatever. I guess like today, everything is not everything, but a lot of stuff is online. What are your thoughts in terms of like giving feedback online and making it genuine and useful and practical to the bigger picture, if you will?
I think if you've grown to the extent, I think if you're just starting, you're starting a podcast, you have friends, you have families that are listening, they're supporting, get them. If you can meet them in person, meet them online, and ask. I think there are three questions. I can't remember the exact questions, but there are questions like, it should be episode be long or short. They can't pick the middle ground. They have to pick a side, and then they'll say, "Oh, it should be long. Why? Why? But it should be short. Why?" And then you're like, "Oh, I listen to the episode when I go to work, and I spend about 30 minutes in transit, and things like that start to come in, right?" So you want to give them questions where they have to pick a side. They cannot just say, "Oh yeah, it's great, it's great, it's great." Yeah. Or you say, "Should the episode be longer?" It's like, "Oh no, it's good like this." They cannot say it's good like this. They have to pick a side, and that in a sense forces people to, when you make it easy for people to give feedback. I think we don't do that. Instead, we just say, "What do you think of the episode?" "Oh yeah, 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 it's great, it's great, it's great."
So I guess how can you build a situation, setting where
Okay.
you can get that? I love that. I love where you're going with this. I want you to keep building on
Yeah.
this.
How we can build that? Or well, one is we could have a survey form. I mean, I feel like that's the easiest. Could have a survey form. That's like in bulk. And then what we could also do is talk to people. You know, talk to people. If someone is commenting and say, "Oh, I love this episode. This episode, this your podcast has been really been life changing to me," and you could ask them, "Come in, I'm really trying to improve my podcast. I don't know if you'll be up for a 15-minute chat to really talk and see how this podcast has been, changing your life." And then they show up and they say, "Oh yeah," and it's like, "Oh what?" And you get to. It's like software. It's like, "Well, how are you using it?" You want to better understand the the listener, and that lens will also help you understand whatever feedback they give. That's if you're making your podcast episode for the listener. So the goal determines on the kind of feedback you're looking for. So if your podcast is just a way to become a better speaker, to articulate your thoughts, and the kind of feedback you're looking for is a bit different. But if you're trying to build a product where it changes people's life, it's a bit different too.
So I kind of want to switch the topic slightly here, obviously still related to podcasting. So you and I both met on Podmatch. What are your thoughts? I guess we're promoting Podmatch here, if you will, but I guess what are
Yeah,
your thoughts with the Podmatch community and why did you want to join? Why are you still a part of it?
the Podmatch community is awesome. It is awesome. Like, if you've been on Podmatch for too long, it makes you lazy in a sense. Because now, when I go outside Podmatch, I have to follow up. I have to like, I'm like, I'm like, sometimes like, not really. Let's just skip it. So Podmatch is an amazing platform. They connect people, and the reason I love Podmatch is for someone who's busy, with a lot of responsibility on your plate, and podcast is not really like the full time thing you're doing. You don't want you want to spend. It's easier to get a yes when you're on a platform where the people there. It's like, if you I'll give an example. If you're a guy who's trying to like find a girlfriend, it's easier to get a girlfriend if you go to maybe a singles conference with all the people who are like looking for a partner, versus you're walking on the street and you're talking to five people, and all the five people, they're either married.
Yeah, right, right. I love this. Yeah, you're right. It's so
And
true.
then you're like, "Oh, these people hate me," and like, no, the context, right? Versus when you're on the platform where people are looking for to connect, to find, partners, maybe a conference and where they're all single, and then you're like, "Oh yeah, hi," and so now it becomes a question of, "Oh, maybe you're not, you need to work on yourself," versus, "Oh, everybody hates me," and that context matters. So with Podmatch, the people there, they really want to be on podcast, and so it's easier to just get a yes, and it's not like you're messaging 20 people and they're like, "Oh, what's a podcast?" I don't really like that thing. I don't know. These people like, I want to be on podcast, and they're like, if the topic makes sense and the podcast makes sense, sure, let's do it. Sometimes you have to send a long pitch. You just say, "Are you game?" And they show up.
No, I love that kind of distinction with walking down the street trying to pick someone up versus going on a dating site. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Alex and Alicia, for with Podmatch too, and obviously with us connecting wisdom. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure getting to know you and learn more about your journey. And
yeah,
with that, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show here. If listeners want to explore one of your multiple podcasts, where's a good place for them to land?
yeah. Oh, we talked about podcasting, so they can go to mypodcaststory.com, and they can listen to podcasting, and yeah, yeah. And they can also listen to the podcast on all platforms, My Podcast Story, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and everywhere they listen to their podcast.
Awesome. Well, wisdom, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
What I enjoyed most about this conversation is that it reminds us that great work is rarely about perfection, it's about practice. Whether you're creating a podcast, leading a team, or simply trying to communicate better with the people around you, growth comes from feedback. But feedback only works if you're paying attention. As we discussed, you have to watch the movie before you can review it. One of my favorite takeaways was the importance of intentional feedback. Most people never practice expressing themselves, yet they expect to become great communicators. Like any skill, though, it takes repetition, reflection, and the willingness to improve after every attempt. Here's a challenge for you this week. Pay attention to how you give feedback. Are you encouraging, honest, curious? Then ask yourself another question. How do you receive feedback? Do you become defensive or do you use it to grow? And no, you can't be counting social media likes as just your feedback, right? We're talking actual feedback here. And finally, ask better questions. Don't settle for did you like it? Ask questions that make people choose a side. Should a podcast episode be short or long, like Wisdom was talking about? Why? Those why questions uncover stories, values, and insights that simple yes or no questions never will. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with someone who loves creating things. Leave a review and subscribe so you never miss another conversation. Until next time, remember work may suck, but when you're building something that matters, learning from feedback, and helping ideas become reality, you might just find yourself liking it. We'll see you next time.